right, we're going. So today is May
16th.
2021.
Yep.
And it's the day before your 90th birthday.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You're Norman Bork.
That's me.
That's you. Right. Okay. Well, Grandpa, where were you born?
Peoria, Illinois, Proctor Hospital on the south side of Peoria.
Yeah.
The old Proctor Hospital.
Yeah.
And I lived with, after being taken home, we lived with Grandma Fanny and Grandpa Isaac. They had a big house, a huge house at 4th and Merriman. And not only did we live with them, Aunt Jeanette and Uncle Charlie and Myrna, my cousin,
Wow.
lived also with them. And Sam Bork lived there. And they had it was like almost a three-story huge house on a corner lot. And no longer there, it's a park now. Then Charlie and Jeanette decided they wanted a place of their own, so they bought a place over by Columbia School. Can't think of the street that it was on. And eventually we moved out on to 1117 McClure Avenue, which was 2 blocks west of Glen Oak Park. It was a rental, and eventually from there bought a home on Eleanor Place off of Sheridan Road in the Franklin School District, which I went to.
Okay.
And at that time we still had streetcars.
In Peoria.
Yeah, they were running down Sheridan Road, and for 4 cents you could ride anywhere.
Wow.
Yeah, that's how I went to school a lot of times, and walked.
Okay.
Grandma Fanny lived up at that point, had moved up on Sheridan Road where the interstate is now. They went through and that's where her house was. And I could go there for lunch from school, run over, have lunch, go back to school.
Nice.
And it was a quieter life in those days.
Yeah.
And we enjoyed it. Saul was born on Eleanor Place, and Paula was 3 years older than I was. And we all went to Franklin School, and then from there Peoria Central. And then we moved out to the Knolls, which was north part of Peoria. 3009 Knoxville was our address, right on the edge of the Knolls. And I went to Columbia School, Columbia Junior High, and graduated from Columbia Junior High on to Peoria Central High School.
Okay. So your parents were
Rhea and Mike Bork.
right, and your grandparents were
Isaac and Fanny.
right.
Yeah. And on the other side of the family, the mom's side of the family, the cask was Sarah and Grandma was he was
Benjamin, right?
huh?
Benjamin. Right?
Yeah. Benjamin Caskowitz, and then Mom had a sister who was actually was a twin, and the other one died at childbirth, and it was a boy.
Yeah.
And so Aunt B was one of a twin.
Yeah.
And we went to New York to see them occasionally, and when Mom got married in New York, matter of fact, she was married in the hospital there. Her grandfather or grandmother, I don't know which it was, I don't remember, was in the hospital, very, very sick and dying. And they had the wedding ceremony right there
In the hospital.
In the hospital, so she could attend.
Really?
Yep. But the funny part of the whole story was that Mom didn't believe in fortune tellers, but her girlfriend did.
Yeah.
And so girlfriend went to the fortune teller and drug mom along. And the fortune teller said, "Let me tell your fortune." And Mom's, no, I don't but she told her fortune, and the fortune teller told her she was going to get married and move across the river.
Yeah.
Well, little did they know she was going to cross the Illinois River.
Yeah, yeah.
And so when they got married, and Dad came back to Peoria and then went back to get her. Her mother, Grandma Sarah, was going to came with her because she was afraid of the Indians.
Okay.
Thought it was a Wild West out there. Yeah.
Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah, it was. Mom tells that story. It's hilarious.
Yeah.
But and she thought when the fortune said you're going to cross the river, maybe the Hudson River or something.
Somewhere in New York.
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
Yeah, but no, I had a very good upbringing. I mean, we lived through the Depression.
Yeah.
And Dad would come home from work at the end of the week and bring $15 home and give Mom the money so she could buy groceries and everything. And then Monday morning, whatever she had left, he took back and to the office.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, things were different.
Yeah.
And Grandpa Isaac they needed some money, so he went down to Southside Bank and borrowed some money. And of course, during the Depression, they called the note, and there's no way they could pay it. So he picked the keys up to the business and walked down, it was about 3 blocks down the street, went in to see Pat Ward, who was the president of the bank, and he was a grocery store owner before he was a banker. He was a lousy banker.
Oh.
And he went in and Grandpa told him, he said, the boys can't make the payment, but he said, what we can do is, he laid the keys on the desk, he says, you can be in the scrap business.
Did he take it?
No.
No.
He said, we'll work it out. He didn't want it. So they put him on, they added the Southside Bank to the payroll, and every Friday when they made payroll, they'd give them, I don't know, $20, $25 or whatever. Just,
yeah. Huh.
But that's how things got started. And Dorothy Oliver worked in the office. She was with them till almost the very end, till she retired and died about a year later.
Oh.
She was from over the Bloomington area, farm gal. But she was a good secretary, and she managed the office, and she's like part of the family. And I remember when she passed away, Uncle Charlie and I went to the funeral over there. Mm-hmm. And they had not only the scrapyard, they had the auto parts. Charlie Bork ran the auto parts, and it was directly across the street from the scrapyard. And it was a building that eventually Grandma and Grandpa owned it. They bought it when things got better. And then Charlie went in the Navy during World War II. He came back, but he didn't stay very long. He wanted to go back. He liked California.
Okay.
And he went in the auto parts business out in California. And then eventually Saul and I bought Bud Ramanowski. Well, Hyman Ramanowski, the father, had a scrapyard in LaSalle, Peru area. And it came up, he turned it over to his son. He died and his son took it over. But Bud didn't want any part of the scrap business. He liked owning Holiday Inns and things like that. So we bought the scrap business. Saul and I bought it for $125,000, going actively. And Charlie Bork, we convinced him to come back, and he moved there with and ran the business. And after about, I guess 4 or 5 years, he just said he wanted to retire.
Okay.
So we ended up selling the business to George Buckman, who wanted to buy it originally from Bud Ramanowski, but Bud wouldn't sell it to him.
Oh.
He said no. He said, I want a total outsider he wanted another Jewish family to move into the community.
Okay.
And that's how, and we turned around and sold it to George. and he passed away about 2 years ago. He was Saul's age,
Okay.
and it had good business there, and then we built on what was in Peoria, and eventually I sold out my interest to Saul, and unfortunately he passed away before I got all my money. And that was the end of it.
Yeah.
He went in, his Glory went in and filed bankruptcy.
Yeah.
So, and so I didn't get a thing after that. But family, and
Right. Exactly.
we did an arm's length deal. I made the mistake of not taking all the money at one time because I didn't want to end up having to pay a lot of taxes.
Okay. Yeah.
So I took it monthly. It was a little easier to take money.
And he was your brother, right? Yeah.
Hmm?
He
Yeah.
was your brother. Yeah.
Yeah, it was an arm's length deal. Our word was that was it.
Right. Of course. Yeah.
And at that time, Dad figured we needed somebody there to sort of guide us financially, so we hired George Landy from Landy and Rothbaum, who used to do all of our tax work and everything. And George was there, I don't know, 6-7 years, and he did a good job for us. And what else can I tell you?
Yeah. Well, so what do you remember about your grandparents?
Grandpa Isaac?
Yeah.
Well, I was young. He passed away in 1938, and I was 7 years old. The one thing I do remember, he was religious, and he started the Peoria Hebrew School, and he used to go around after school and pick up like Harold Miller and a whole group of young Jewish kids and take them to Hebrew school. They weren't too thrilled about going because they just soon play baseball.
Right. Right. Yeah, they were kids.
Yeah, and but they were educated. They had behind the old synagogue was another building, a house that they converted to a school, and I went there, learned Hebrew, and he wasn't around for my bar mitzvah, but he was quite instrumental in the Jewish community. He was president of the synagogue for God knows how many years, and after he passed away, they elected Dad, and he served from the 30s up through the 50s as president of the synagogue. And then the younger group wanted a new building farther out north, get away from the south side of Peoria, so they came to Dad. Dad said, that's fine, but he said, if you're going to do this, you're going to have to raise the money, because he said, I won't sign a mortgage. So they went out and raised enough money to build that synagogue out there at Sheridan and War Memorial, which is no longer there.
Yeah, it's a shame.
It's an empty lot today, but it was a beautiful edifice.
Yeah.
And but the unfortunate part about the whole thing, the younger generation moved away from Peoria. They went to school, they got married, moved away, took different jobs all over the country, and so the population went down. They couldn't afford to keep the building.
Yeah, similar thing in Rockford, right? The synagogue and temple there.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, well, that's just happened in Rockford. The synagogue was sold.
Yeah, right.
And they rent a room now from the temple.
Yeah, right. Yeah. What do you remember of Grandma Fanny?
Grandma Fanny was well, the only thing I can tell you, Marcia is a reincarnation of Grandma Fanny. Grandma, you did it her way or no way.
Yeah.
I mean, she was very adamant about things, and she was, when it came to raising money for B'nai B'rith or whatever, she was out there doing it, and she'd go downtown, and the Jewish people would see her coming, they'd reach in their pockets, because she always was selling something, tickets for a raffle or something, and she became known as Tickets Bork. and they never refused her, you know.
Yeah.
And she was she was great with the, well, we were all my kids, you know, knew her and loved her, and she was she was, you know, she'd come to Florida in the wintertime. They'd send her down to Miami Beach, South Beach, in those days, and Patty and I went down for a vacation down there. We went down to see her, and there was some family down there. I don't remember their names, but they were cousins or something.
In Miami Beach?
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, they'd winter down there too, and
Oh,
we'd
okay.
all get together.
Oh, cool.
And we go to Joe's Stone Crab, which was a great restaurant. That's all you got was stone crab.
Okay.
And Grandma liked to go to the dog track. You know, we had, you know, in later years, she really had a good life. It was a struggle at the very beginning, you know.
Yeah, she moved over from Poland. And
Yeah, well, when Grandpa came to the United States back in 1898, I believe it was, to help build the St. Louis Exposition, and from there he got a job on a steamboat firing the boilers, and they stopped in Keokuk, Iowa to take on fuel, coal, and he was sitting on the dock. He was stripped to the waist, coal dust black, and he was reading the Jewish Forward.
Yeah.
And I don't know how he got it in Keokuk, but he did. And this fella kept walking around looking at him, and he finally walked over and he said, "How can a black man read a Jewish newspaper, you know, the Hebrew
it's
paper?"
Yiddish or Hebrew, yeah.
And of course he rubbed the skin. He said, "I'm not black."
Yeah.
He told him what to do, and he said, "That's no job for a Jewish man to fire boilers." He said, "Come with me to," he said, "I'm working the harvest fields of Iowa and Illinois." In those days, they picked corn by hand.
Wow.
They didn't have machines. So he went and made some good money, but he was very religious. He kept kosher, and the farm ladies would cook for the crew that was working, and one lady noticed that he wasn't eating anything but vegetables, and come in.
Here, I'll pause it.
Realized
Hey, Fry. Oh, it's okay.
realized that, you know, and they started, she's cooked for him special, and then as they go to the next farm, she sent word ahead, this is what you do,
Okay.
and they ended up in Ottumwa, and eventually Peoria. And the first night in Peoria, they stayed at Patty's grandparents' house.
Cantors?
Cantors, yeah.
Oh, it's okay, Fry. Here, let me stop.
We had, Fry was just here,
Yeah.
and I used to babysit Barry.
Yeah, tell me about Barry.
When he was a kid, I mean, he was a cute little thing.
Yeah.
And he was sort of the black sheep of the family, more or less. I mean, whatever he did, Grandma didn't approve of.
Yeah.
My dad didn't approve of some of the things he did. So he ran off and joined the Navy. And came back, he met Fry, who was his wife. And her family had a bar up in Peoria Heights. Her dad had a bar. And she got sick. And my mom, she was really, really sick. And so Mom brought her home and to our house, and she stayed there till Mom nursed her back to health.
This was Fry that got sick?
Huh?
Fry got sick?
Oh yeah, she was awful sick. I don't know what it was or anything. If she wants to even talk about it.
Okay.
But Mom nursed her back to health, and they became close friends after that. And Barry worked for us, worked for me, and he crane operator. He could do anything, but he was obstinate, and he didn't like the job. He'd walk off, and I don't know how many times I fired him.
Yeah.
And Grandma Fanny would come down and say, "Put him back to work. He's
family. Yeah.
he says, you know, you're cousins,
Yeah.
and you can't do this." And she'd have a long talk with him, and he'd promise to, you know, he'd behave.
Fry told me a story about Saul coming over to, to hire him back, and they had a pet monkey at the time. Do you remember this?
They did?
Barry and Fry had a pet monkey.
I don't remember that.
Oh, okay. I'll let her tell that story later. But yeah, that's...
Now, the only one I knew had a pet monkey was Jim Reynolds, who was an attorney. And that damn monkey, anything shiny, keys or anything, he'd go around and grab them and go hide them. Jim would have people come to the house, and the damn monkey would steal their car keys.
Yeah. Well, it might have been the same monkey. Maybe they sold it to him.
And they had a hell of a time with him. He finally had to put him in a cage when people were coming over.
Yeah. What do you remember of your mother's parents, Grandma Maria's parents?
Well, I saw them, you know, occasionally.
Yeah.
And I remember Grandma Sarah was a lousy cook. Well, my mother would say all she could do is boil water, you know. But whatever she made had no seasoning in it and had no taste to it, but that's the way it was. Aunt B used to say the same thing as my mother. Horrible cook. You know. And Grandpa was a tailor by profession, and during the Depression, he'd repair clothes and bundle them up and send them down south. They sold them to the store the black people used down there, and that's how he made a living.
Okay.
His brothers, Abe and Saul and the rest of them, modernized to an American way, but he never did.
Okay.
He just same as he was in Europe.
Was he religious, or was he religious?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they were, well, up to a, yeah, he was, I'd say he was religious. And, but he just never modernized. Abe became a CPA and did real well, and Saul was in business, millinery business. As a matter of fact, he hired Mom
Really?
when she was a teenager, making ladies' hats, and in those days it was a good business.
Did he own the hat company?
Yeah,
Saul?
yeah, he started it, and and Aunt B told the story. As a matter of fact, I've got it on video somewhere.
I know the video. Yeah.
Yeah, that she was working in a factory someplace and making like $7 a week, and he went in and made her quit, and he said, "I'm going to teach you bookkeeping."
Okay.
And
so that was Saul Kaskowitz then that did that, right?
That was Aunt B.
Yeah, but the man who hired her was Saul.
No, it was Abe.
Oh, it was Abe. Okay.
And he said, "I'm going to teach you the accounting business."
I see.
And he said, "I'm going to pay you $3 a week." Well, she had a fit. She said, "I'm making $7. You're going to pay me, you know."
Yeah.
But the smartest thing that she did was go along with him, because she ended up working for the Department of Transportation, or the Army Department of Transportation, for years, retired from that job.
Yeah, it's a good job. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. She had good insurance. She had everything. She bought a condo. Didn't do me any favors. I went to New York. Patty and I went to New York. I don't know how many times. And would sit down and say, "Aunt B, we need to go see a lawyer. You need to make a will."
Yeah.
"No, they'll steal everything I've got." That was her stock answer.
Yeah.
I said, "Well, then do me a favor. Let's go down to the Jewish Burial Society and and you can pay for a Jewish funeral.
Yeah.
No, they charge too much. They'll steal what I got. And when she died, well, she was in the hospital. I got a call. She was diabetic.
Oh, she was diabetic?
Yeah, but she wouldn't take care of herself.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, she wouldn't take care of herself. And her neighbors, friends that hadn't seen her in 2 or 3 days, and she had this condo. She had 7 locks on the door. Trusted nobody.
Yeah.
They had to bring a locksmith in. It took him almost a day to get the door open. Found her on the floor in a coma.
Oh, jeez.
They called, the emergency, and they came out, and I got a phone call right away, and Patty and I packed up and went to New York.
Yeah.
And I had keys to the condo, and she used to write me letters, and luckily I kept them, put them in a binder, and telling me what she wanted done,
Good, yeah.
And the last thing she always put in the letter, she said, "The condo is yours." Well, I went there it was a co-op actually, and I went to the front desk. They weren't going to let me, I had keys. They weren't going to let me in.
Why?
Their rules. I said, I'm the only member of her family that's still alive outside of her sister, and she couldn't travel at that point. So finally, I showed them. Then I went to an attorney in New York. A friend of mine I did business with took me to his attorney. He looked at all this and he said, technically, this is a will.
Yeah.
He said she should have had it witnessed. But he said, come on with me. We're going to go across to probate court right now. I know the judge. Laid it down in front of him. He said, this is a will. So he told his secretary, he says, you put up a letter and say that Mr. Bork's the rightful.
Yeah.
Went back, showed him the letter. They weren't going to give it back to me. They wanted to keep it. I said, no, you make a copy of it. That's mine.
Yeah.
So they sent a guard with me Patty and I, up to the apartment. And he says, you can't take anything out of there. Well, Patty was busy talking to the guard. I went in and got all of her jewelry. Okay. I knew where it was, and
yeah.
took all that, and because somebody would have stole it.
Yeah, right.
And we went up to the hospital. She was in a coma, and the doctor said, she's not going to come out of this, but she needs surgery. I said, what? Well, we need to do this. And I said, no, leave her alone. You're telling me she's going to die anyhow. Why put her through
surgery?
Yeah, I don't know what it was for now. But she passed away. It was sad. The old Jewish cemetery where her mom and dad, grandpa and grandpa were buried.
Yeah.
We went out there, 4 people. 2 of them were grave diggers.
Oh, that is sad.
Yeah, I hired a rabbi, a young rabbi. He came out and did the services, and we buried her. And she just didn't. She had friends, but she didn't have friends because she could get nasty. She was.
Okay.
She meant well, but just like she said with the lawyer, they'll steal everything I got.
Yeah.
She didn't trust anybody.
Yeah. Oh, that's a shame.
Yeah, it really was, and it would have been nice if it took me forever to go through. She had a stack of passbooks about like that from different banks where she had money, and she'd read the paper. If this bank was paying a 0.25% interest more than the bank she was in,
she'd move it around.
Move it out.
Yeah.
Well, banks merged, banks were sold, banks closed up. I went to the main bank where she had her checking account, and this gal was behind the desk. I think she was from Jamaica or someplace. And I walked in and I said, I need to see one of the vice presidents. Well, have you got an appointment? I said, no, I haven't got an appointment. I just drove 900 miles to get here.
Yeah.
well, I'm sorry, you got to have an appointment. She started giving me a real hard time.
Yeah.
So this one officer of the bank was walking by and he heard all this. He stopped her cold in her tracks and said, why don't you go get a cup of coffee? I'll take care of this. So I went in his office and I laid this pile of passbooks down in front of me. He said, oh my God. The one for his bank, they had to they had to put the interest that she never bothered to go in and have put into the book, passbook. They had to close the account, had to reopen the account in my name
Okay.
so I could pay her bills.
Oh my gosh.
And I said, what about these others? He said, go to the address on them. That's all I can tell you. He said, if they're there, they're there. If not, maybe somebody can tell you where they moved or what happened.
Yeah.
It took me 2 weeks.
Wow.
To go into the bank, finally, I go in and I show him the letter and everything from the judge. And I'd get a check. Close the account out, take a check. And went across the street from the co-op. Well, first of all, you offer the co-op back to the association. They didn't want it. They didn't.
They didn't want it.
Well, they didn't want to pay the money.
Okay. Yeah.
They didn't want. And so they told me go across the street. The guy that handles resales. Went over there and talked to the nice guy, and he went over, looked at it, put a price on it. I said, okay. He said, give me a few days and let me see what I can do. Well, it took about a little over a week. The first guy that wanted to buy it had cash. He had to go before the board of the co-op. They wouldn't approve him. Some member of his family was associated with the mafia.
Okay. Yeah.
So
They didn't want anything to do with that.
The next one was a Chinese couple. And that was fine with, the area was turning to Orientals.
Yeah.
They came in with brown paper bags, money, cash. They didn't believe in banks.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Well,
So he called me up and he said, what do you want to do? I said, take their money,
Yeah.
deposit it, write me a check.
yeah.
So he said, okay, but he said, I'll tell you what, I'll write you a number of checks. If you don't want to put more than $9,900 in any one bank account, or they'll raise a red flag
Oh, really?
for taxes.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
So we did that. It took me, went back to Rockford and started making deposits.
Yeah.
Paid off the bills, gave Saul's kids $30,000 apiece.
Okay.
Gave Marcia money, gave Michael money, because that's what she wanted to do. Because she had a horrible eyesight problem.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
And she said the rest of the family, they don't, I worry about those two. So, and Mike didn't want to take the money. He said, and I just said, take it, do whatever you want with it. Put money in the Paula Bork Memorial Fund.
Right. Good. Yeah.
And I told Patty, I said, the last place I want to live is in New York.
Yeah.
It was her thinking. She bought it pre-construction.
Really?
Like
Wow.
like 50 grand.
Yeah.
For another $500, this was a 1-bedroom. For another $500, she could have had a 2-bedroom facing the East River. She was over the parking lot behind the building. She wasn't going to spend the money.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's funny.
I mean, that was Aunt B. I mean,
It was very practical. Yeah.
well, she worked hard for her money, and she wasn't going to let anybody,
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
But she could have had a beautiful 2-bedroom unit. And it was at that time it was down by the Battery in New York. It was a nice area. But the Orientals were slowly moving in.
Yeah. Becoming Chinatown.
And, she, wherever we went we went to New York, we go out, we'd ride the bus, ride the subway, I said, let's take a cab. No, it's too expensive. Yeah.
And maybe this is related, but what was it like growing up in the Depression?
Well, what I remember of it, because you know, my mom used to could make a meal out of a boiled potato with green beans and a white sauce.
Yeah.
I mean, if you got meat, that was a real treat.
Yeah.
But she could do a vegetable thing. I mean, it was tough. I'm sure they had, financially that they were doing great. Uh, Particularly when Dad had to take money back Monday morning to open the business.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, so if Mom would go to the grocery, maybe spend $3, $4, $5, and that was it. We They worked hard. The one thing I do remember, Dad didn't have a whole lot of time for the kids. Harry Utley, who worked for not Harry, oh God, what was his name? Yeah, I guess it was Harry Utley, who worked for Dad, would come on weekends and take us out to the park, to Bradley Park or whatever, and spend an afternoon or whatever. But Dad didn't have the time. He was busy working. And when he wasn't working, he was really involved with the American Legion, which he became post commander, later state commander, and he, World War One vets.
Yeah.
And he traveled all over the state when he was state commander to various different posts. He wore out, I don't know, a couple automobiles. And Dick Reynolds used to go with him. A couple of the fellows who would travel, they'd all go together. And that's vaguely what I remember. And then, because the only time I think we went, Uncle Sam would take us also. We'd go down to the river, go fishing.
Okay. Yeah.
And
did Sam work at the scrapyard?
No, he was in the Air Force, and when he came back, he opened his own machine shop over in East Peoria. He didn't agree with the way they were running the auto parts.
Okay.
And after Barry's father died, Uncle Charlie and Dad went and visited with him and bought him out of his business and brought him. And they opened a new store. They built a new building down the street, put in a machine shop. They did automobile engine rebuilding, did a lot of work for Caterpillar, rebuilding transmissions and rear ends for their fleet, motors. And he did well there. And he married Jerry. I don't even know what her last name, from Joliet. And unfortunately, she had a massive stroke. She worked at the office with him.
Yeah.
And she had a massive stroke while they were sitting at her desk. And I remember Dr. Adlin, he was going up to the hospital to check on her, and I rode up with him, and I wanted to go upstairs with him. They wouldn't let me up. He said no. And she was quite a gal. But she had been married before, had 3 kids.
Okay.
Pam, who Sam adopted, the only one, and her sister, and then Mickey, her brother. And Mickey and Betsy and I all, and his family. He married this gal from Russia. He was in the Marine Corps.
Mickey did?
Yeah, and I think he served over in Moscow, and then he met her and ended up marrying a real nice gal. And he inherited or bought. His uncles had a fantastic glass business out in California. They had They, windows,
Yeah.
storefronts, it really did real well. And Mickey worked for him, and he ended up buying the business from him, and he and his partner, and he retired. Well, he sold the business, but kept the property. He got income coming from the property. At least he did have. I don't know what's going on in California now, But they came to Florida. He had a huge motorhome they traveled around in, and we met him. Oh, where was it? On the Gulf there. I don't remember what town it was. They went to the seafood place, and we've met him a couple times, and talked to his sister Pam, which nobody gets along with. I don't know if you know her or not.
Yeah, I've met her a couple times.
Yeah, she's very opinionated. And her husband was a pharmacist.
Okay.
And he retired from I think Walgreens. He had his own business, then he sold out and went to work for Walgreens. And she's living in Wilmington, North Carolina now. They had lived up in the Chicago area.
Yeah, Barrington, right?
Yeah, and I talk to her occasionally, particularly when there's a hurricane coming.
Okay, yeah, good.
Yeah, and she, and Betsy talked to her a couple times, and she kept insisting that Betsy come visit him, and they're 5 hours away, and Betsy's busy working, and
yeah, sure.
She said, "Why don't you?" Betsy told her, "You come over here," and no, she's not coming.
Yeah.
Anyhow, that's depression-wise, I don't remember much about it because I was young.
Yeah.
And in 1938 when Grandpa died, I was 7 years old. I remember it was a rainy day that they buried him. I didn't go. They didn't take me to the funeral. I stayed home, and none of the kids went to the funeral.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Because it was a rainy day, and it was, it was over quick due to the weather.
Yeah, sure.
But Grandpa Isaac, the one thing I do remember from Pesach and Yom Kippur, we'd go over to Grandma's house. She'd do a family thing, and we have services. We'd get up at 9:30 and leave the table. He'd be still sitting there davening till midnight.
Wow. Very religious then.
Yeah. And Shabbos they walked to the synagogue. They wouldn't ride. They'd have the neighbor come in to light the lights or light the stove.
Yeah.
It's the way they were. But when the synagogue was on the south side, Grandma and Grandma probably at that point on Sheridan Road. They were probably 3-4 miles to the synagogue, but they'd walk to and from.
Well, yeah, that's the way to do it, right? If you're
religious like they were. Yeah. And the one story I do remember is Mom and Dad had gone out of town for something, and Uncle Sam stayed at the house and took care of us while they were gone for a couple of days, and he liked pork chops. Mom kept a kosher house at that time. So he got her cast iron skillet out. So, I don't know which one of us kids made the comment how good the pork chops were. Oh my God, what a fiasco that turned. They had to go out in the backyard and bury the skillet, and then the other thing I remember after we moved out to Knoxville, and Paula was real sick. And at that time, She had lupus. They didn't have a clue what to do with it, how to handle it. And the worst thing you could do is be outside in the sun.
Yeah.
And the editor of the Peoria Journal had a ranch down in Arizona. And he was close with Dad, and he said, it was getting close to winter. He said, Mike, he said, why don't you take your daughter and your wife down there and stay at the ranch, you know.
Yeah.
She's out in the sun,
Right.
brutally hot sun. And Dr. Campbell kept tabs on her, kept doing blood work on her and blood sediment tests and everything. He probably kept her going longer than any other doctor kept her alive. He kept her alive, but finally her body organs started shutting down. And I remember the funeral, and came home, and Mom went into the kitchen, took all the dishes out of the cabinet and threw them out in the driveway. She could not understand why God was punishing her. And that was the end of the kosher home.
Yeah. Oh, that's very sad.
And she never would go, she vowed never to go back to the synagogue, although in later years she did. But for years she couldn't get her high holidays or anything, no way. But that was her thing, she just couldn't understand why God was punishing. You know.
That's awful. That's so sad.
Well, yeah, Paul had just graduated high school.
Yeah.
And they had put up a hospital bed in the dining room, made it into a bedroom for her because she couldn't climb the steps, two-story house. And I remember, you know, she was in love with Frank Sinatra, like most of the kids in those days.
All of us?
Yeah. She thought he was the greatest. And I went down Jay's radio. He was a Jewish fellow, and he had two daughters. Went to school with Jay Jacobson, and I don't know what his name was, but it was Jay's.
Yeah.
And he had a poster, big full-life poster of Frank Sinatra. And I said to him, told him about it. He said, "Take it with you." Took it home, put it in the bedroom. Or her room there.
Yeah, yeah.
But, yeah, she had, Paula played the piano. Dad got his bonus from World War I eventually. Mom took the money and bought a grand piano. And Forrest Woodman, who was quite a musician and conductor in Peoria at the time, gave her piano lessons, and she was good. It got to the point she couldn't play, and Cy Walk used to come over to visit Mom and Dad and Paul, and he'd sit down and play the piano. Mm-hmm. Never took a lesson in his life.
Oh, wow.
One of these that just could sit down and play it.
Yeah.
And every time he'd come over, he'd be there for hours playing the piano. And, you know, they had close friends who would come over and visit with her. And Harry Ehrlichman would be there all the time.
Was he a family friend, or who was...
Well, the Ehrlichmans were in the scrap business.
I see, okay.
And for years, you know, the families were friends. Becky Dennison and Uncle Dave weren't really uncle and aunt, but they treated, you know, they lived over by the school, and after Grandma moved, I'd go there for lunch. Oh. And they moved down here to Florida, and they've since passed away. They had two kids, Muriel and what the hell was Jerry Dennison. Muriel passed away, but I think Jerry's still around someplace down here in Florida.
Okay.
And they were, you know, in those days, friends were close. Wasn't like today, you know. But they did things as a family. They got pictures somewhere of the whole family plus the Dennisons and all in one in the backyard,
Yeah.
a big group of about 20, 25 people. Dave Brenner and his brother and Saul when he was little. The one thing, when I was growing up, my mother wouldn't allow Dad to take me for a haircut.
Why?
I had beautiful blonde curls.
Yeah, yeah.
And Dad used to go down to the Pere Marquette Hotel to the barber shop and that's where he got a haircut. And he took me one day with him and put me up in the chair and come in.
Yeah, awesome. Okay.
Yeah, Dad put me up in the chair and Walt, I don't remember what his last name was, the barber, and he said, "Oh no." He said, "I'm not cutting that young man's hair." He says, "Your wife will kill me." Dad says, "I'm the one that pays the bills.
Yeah.
You cut his hair." So I cut my hair and came home and Mom looked at me and she said, "This is not my child." And I started crying.
How old were you?
Oh, I was probably 3.
Oh, no.
And my mom never forgave him.
Oh, jeez. That's so funny.
Yeah, and then the other thing that would happen, my fingernails, Mom would trim my nails. We'd go outside in the front yard and she'd dig a little hole and she'd cut my nails and said, "We'll plant them and they'll grow." She conned me into that.
Can you believe that? Yeah, yeah.
And
what did you think they would grow into?
I don't know. I mean, I was little at the time.
Yeah, yeah.
And it was growing up was different in those days, really.
Yeah.
We had a grocery store right across the street, and the Reynolds family, Jim Reynolds' mom and dad, his mother, Agnes, looked a lot like Mom. They could pass for sisters.
Mm.
And one day, Mom was in the grocery store there, it was just a little corner market, and the guy that owned it said, he said, "Your sister is Catholic and you're Jewish." She says, "Well, what do you want to know?" She said, "Well, my sister married out of the religion."
Yeah.
For years, everybody thought they were
sisters.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Really. I mean, they had dark hair. They looked alike,
Yeah.
same size, and very close friends. Every Sunday night, 8 o'clock, Walter Winchell used to be on. I don't know.
No, I don't know Walter.
Well, he was like Cronkite.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Newscaster.
And
yeah.
during the war, the news and everything, and he'd have a telegraph key, and he'd
Yeah.
flash, and we'd all go over. They'd come over to the house. And God, you didn't open your mouth when he was on the air. That was it. You listened.
Yeah.
And at that time, Dick Reynolds' son. Well, Victor Reynolds, actually, they called him Dick the father, but his son was Dick Reynolds. Mm-hmm. He was in the Philippines when the Philippines fell, and he made the Bataan Death March.
Wow.
He wrote a book about it.
He survived, yeah.
Yeah, I've never been able to get a copy of it. And Jim enlisted in the Navy. He went into the V-12 program or something, became a pilot.
Okay.
And he flew fighters, dive bombers, and Betty, the youngest sister, was Saul's age, and she's living in Georgia someplace now. So she'd be up in her years too, if she's still alive. And they go back. Dick, when he was in the Navy, was on the Yangtze River. When they had was it the Panapay or one of the gunboats was attacked?
I don't know.
Well, this is back in the late 30s.
Okay.
And then he went to the Philippines, and of course when they surrendered, he was part of that death march. and they just didn't know where he was or what he was. And of course, Jim, they was in the South Pacific flying off a carrier, and when they invaded the Philippines, the one prison camp was a Cabanatuan prison, and as far as they knew, that's where he was, but they weren't sure. And the squadron leader told Jim, he said, we're going to be over there by that prison camp, and you're not going to have engine trouble.
Oh, I see.
He threatened to land there and go look for his brother.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Well, they found out that he was on one of these ships that they shipped the prisoners to Japan. He was working on the docks in Yokohama.
Really?
Forced labor.
Oh, wow.
And they had a mule that they loaded stuff on, and the mule was eating better than they were. They were starving him to death, so they started stealing the grain from the mule.
Oh, wow.
Cook had to eat it. The mule died. They couldn't figure out why. He starved him to death.
Yeah.
And after the war, he came back, and when Korea started, he went back to the Navy and re-enlisted after going through all this. And his mother and dad just about had a fit. Ev Dirksen was a congressman at that time, and a close friend of our family and their family. They told him, and he got him back. He was already over in Korea. They brought him back. And Jim, who flew reciprocal engine planes during World War II, they called him back up. And he was a lawyer at the time. He'd already been through law school and just did practice and everything. And he just told me they put him in jets, training to fly a jet. And he was almost 40 years old.
Yeah.
Oh God, he was just unbelievable. What he went through. He got the Navy Cross. He had an album, and I saw it. He let me look at it briefly. It showed him from his gun camera pictures. What shooting down planes, sinking some of these little boats on the coastline, and he came back. He was wounded. He had one eye he had a lot of problems with after, because when the thing that happened to him they say it could never happen, but an albatross came through his windshield.
Oh, jeez. Yeah.
And
pinned him down.
It hit him in the shoulder, pinned him into the armor plate. And there was an article written. It was in Collier's magazine. The whole story. He flew back the wingman flew him back to the carrier. He knew his airplane. One thing about Jim, he was methodical. He knew where everything was by touch. He didn't have to look to see. Of course, the windshield was gone, and he had all this crap in his eyes.
Yeah.
And they flew him back to the carrier, and he was ordered to bail out. He said, "There's no way I can bail out. I'm pinned into the seat with the armor plate." Well, ditch. He said, "I'll never get out of the plane."
Yeah, right.
He said, "I will land on a carrier." And he did. The wingman flew him right down, put him down on the carrier.
Wow, that's really impressive.
Oh, yeah. He didn't talk much about it. I know I went to his funeral. His brother Dick read the whole list of things. I had no idea what he had done during the war, but he had the Navy Cross. He had all kinds of different, badge or things that he had earned during the war.
Yeah.
And he was a type of lawyer that if you murdered somebody, you wanted him on your side.
Okay, he was a good lawyer.
Oh, he was
Yeah.
he was ruthless.
Yeah.
There's one story I do remember about him. We had bought this house across from Vanakins Junction in Peoria, Route 88. Now it's color out something else, and we bought it from the contractor, and we moved in, and everything was fine. Patty called me one day. She says, "We got a problem." I said, "What is it?" She said, "Sears called. They either want their money for the drapes and the carpeting, or they're going to come take it."
Oh.
I says, "You don't let them in the house." I called Jim. He said, "Okay." He said, "I'll come over this evening. We'll sit and talk about it." Come over, he had a drink or two, and about 10:30 he picks up the phone, and he said, "Oh no," he told me first go down to the courthouse. Well, those were had just as a piece. Go down and get 2 warrants, one for the builder, one for the realty company. Well, the realty company was a big realty company in town, and it was for the president of the company.
Oh, wow.
This is like on a Friday night.
Yeah.
So about 10:30, 10:45, he said, "Okay, where's your phone?" I said, picks up the phone, called the sheriff's office. He said, "I've got 2 warrants I want served by midnight tonight."
On a Friday night, yeah.
Yeah, well, all these guys off to jail. I mean,
wow.
And they couldn't do anything till Monday. They spent the whole weekend in jail.
Jeez.
Oh, I got phone calls from the guy who built the house. His wife was in tears, and just how could you do this? I said, "I'm not paying for something I've already paid for."
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Oh. So Jim called upstairs. He said, if you come near the house, you're going to be," he said, "I'll have the police there." But he said, "As a matter of just to settle this thing now, we'll give you 10 cents on the dollar."
What did they do? Did they accept that?
Well, they argued about it.
Of course, yeah.
And Jim says, "That's fine. You don't want to take it?"
Yeah.
They took it.
Yeah. Huh.
But I mean, he was a good lawyer. I mean, but I'll tell you, if you did anything, you really wanted him on your side.
I bet. Yeah.
And the other thing that happened, I've got a picture of him standing next to the Model T Ford I had. I don't know if you saw that picture.
I've seen the picture, yeah.
Okay, well, I got it out in the spring.
The Model T.
Yep. Yeah. And the neighbor kids all wanted to go for a ride. Well, put them in it. We drove around. The Heights police stopped me. I wasn't on the main road, back road, one of those little side streets. I didn't have a current license plate on it.
Yeah.
And they give me a hard time. And they followed me home. They called for backup.
They called for backup?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yeah. So they wrote me out a citation, a ticket. And we go to court. Well, Tom Trigger and I went to high school together. He was the state's attorney.
Okay. Yeah.
The judge and I went to high school together. And I walked in, and the judge said, "Norm, what are you doing here?" I said, "Well, I should." Yeah, Tom walked up. He said, "Let me see the papers you got." And he said, told the judge, he said, "Okay, save him to last. We'll take care of that the very last thing today." And he said, "I want to make sure that arresting officer's here in the courtroom." So we went through the whole thing, and the judge said to Tom, he said, "Is there anything in the statute that says that he has to have a license plate on that car? It's an antique." So Tom said, "I can't find anything in the law books." So he turned to the officer, and he said, he said, "I live down the street." And he said, "We get these guys, it's a 30-mile-an-hour speed zone. We get these guys coming down there 50, 60 mile an hour." And he said, "All you can do on a Sunday afternoon is arrest somebody for driving a Model T Ford?"
Yeah, with neighbor kids in it, right? Yeah.
He said, "I got to have a talk with the chief." So he dismissed the case. They fired the officer.
Did they really?
Oh yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah, the heights. He talked to the chief. Told him.
Hmm.
He said, if I get one more speeder coming down my road, he said, you're going to have a headache that you don't want to have. So they started patrolling.
Huh.
But the other thing was Stanley Gluckin. I don't know if you remember him or not.
Never heard that name.
Well,
No.
Jewish member of the community, and he rode motorcycles, and he had an artist studio. He did metal type things. And I had a small motorcycle at the time. I had a trail bike. And we went out. It was a Saturday afternoon. Went out riding. We stopped at a bar or two and come back. And over the fireplace, I had this Civil War musket, 58 caliber. So Stanley says, does that thing shoot? I said, well, I guess it does. I said, I've got some Colt pistols that I go out and shoot against the side of the garage, cap and ball. And they just embed in the wood, you know. So we go out and we load it up. Now, 58 caliber is about that big around.
Yeah, it's big. Yeah.
Boom, when the smoke cleared, hole in the garage, 6 storm windows, went through 3, I had a couple of cars in there, right through the hood. No, it didn't touch the engine, but went right through the hood.
Yeah.
Hit a 4x4 post at the far end, and it's a good thing it did, because that bullet would have gone into the shopping center across the street.
Oh my gosh.
So I called Denny Powers, who was my insurance agent, and he's still around. Mike says he sees him occasionally, and he asks about me. And called Denny up and told him I got a problem. He laughed it off, you know.
Yeah. He didn't believe it?
Didn't, you know. So
Yeah.
about 5 o'clock, Patty said, it was in the fall of the year, somebody's out there with a flashlight. It was Denny. He said, he came in, and I went out, and he said, well, we'll pay for the 6 storm windows.
Yeah.
But no, we had, you know, as we grew a little older, got a little wiser, but still did crazy things. And came home and, well, no, we were down at the Ivy Club. We were sitting around with a bunch of our friends, and Mike Steinberg, who Mickey worked for, well, he was instrumental in getting him started, you know. And came over, he wanted to buy the house we were living in. It was a big red brick, 2-story with white covers, colonial. And had this big garage with an apartment over the top of it, had room for 6 cars. And so it made a deal, money-wise and everything, but I didn't tell Patty. We're sitting around down at the Ivy Club, and one of the guys, knew me, said, when are you moving, Patty?
Oh my gosh.
All hell broke loose. What do you mean, when am I moving? And he said, well, your husband has sold the house.
Were you there with her, or?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So anyhow, we got home and we caught all kinds of hell. She said, you find me a place to live. So Stanley, trying to think, I got to remember her name. The gal that had cancer real bad, and they did. They still have a fundraiser every year. Oh God, I can't think of the name right now. It'll come to me. But anyhow, there was an ad in the paper for a townhouse on Daytona Drive. So called over there, and she heard my voice. She said, Norm, are you interested? I said, I'll come over and look. It was a nice townhouse, had 3 bedrooms, parked underneath, and she was sick. Her dad and mom lived next door. It was the 2 center townhouses were up and down, and then you had 2 houses, 2 along, all in one attached.
Okay.
But it was like just a, it wasn't a multi-story.
Yeah.
And went over, looked at it, was real nice. And she said, if you don't want to buy it, I'll rent it to you. So I said, okay, I'll rent it with the option to buy it.
Yeah.
We set a price. And Patty was really liked it. The only problem was all the kids came home at one time.
Oh, from school? Yeah.
From school.
Yeah.
Mike had to sleep on the couch downstairs. The girls had the bedrooms upstairs. We had a bedroom there. Yeah. And Marv Goodman lived next door, and it was his daughter that, oh God, it bugs me. I can't think of it. They do this fundraiser every year. Her sister promised to cure her for cancer.
Oh, is it like the big Coleman? Susan Coleman?
Coleman.
Yeah.
Yeah, Susie Coleman.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we were there about 2 months, and I called her up and I said, we're going to buy the place. Okay. So I called Joey Sauls up, who was the attorney, and did everything, and we bought that for $50,000. Well, when I got ready to fully retire, and we decided we wanted to travel, give it to Jim Maloof, the realtor in Peoria.
Yeah, yeah.
He got $105,000 for it. Guy from Caterpillar was coming back from Singapore, and he wanted a place. And he came in, and he flew in and looked at it, made his decision like right now, and bought it. And we started traveling. Betsy was living in Dallas at the time. Bryna was married, living in Bloomington. Mike was finishing up
at ASU?
Yeah. And Marcia had moved down to Tennessee and went to work for a dentist down there before she lost her sight completely.
Oh, okay.
And matter of fact, they were talking about him last night.
Yeah, yeah.
And so we had we'd go visit him, and but they all went their own way at that point. Mickey and Cheryl hooked up together, and Marcia met David out in El Paso, and Bryna was married to Jim at the time, and Betsy had moved down to Florida and met Todd, so things worked out. But it was great raising the 4 of them, and great raising my grandchildren. They turned out pretty good.
Yeah. Well.
Okay.
Let's pause for a second.
Huh?
I wanted to ask about Helen Stein.
Okay, Helen, during World War II, Grandma Fanny was related to the family, and she was a Gritzman, and somewhere along the line they were related. They had a daughter, Helen, who was I don't know, 7th or 8th grade at the time, and the Blitz was going on in London and everything, and they wrote a letter to Grandma, actually, asking her anything at all she could do to take her out of London, and Grandma immediately responded, and she came to Grandma met her in New York, brought her home, and she lived with Charlie, Bork, and Doris for a while. They didn't have any children. And then when they decided to go to California, Helen came and stayed with us and went through school.
Yeah. How long was she there with you?
Oh, God, she didn't go back till 46 or 47.
Really? After the war?
Yeah.
Yeah.
She didn't want to go back. She wanted to stay. In the worst way, she didn't want to go back to England. And she pleaded with Grandma. But, you know.
Her parents were still over there.
Yeah, but her family wanted her back. And, yeah, she was not the most attractive gal in the world, but she was attractive in her own way. But she enjoyed the life in the United States.
Yeah.
And she went back to England, got married, and had some kids. And then Mike told me how he met her in the elevator.
Yeah.
And at that point, she was on her own. She was divorced, I guess.
Okay.
And but she, you know, came back to the States. And I don't know why she never recontacted anybody. But she was a good student. She had made a lot of friends. A couple of them will still ask me about her. Well, this one girl worked for Stanley Coleman when he had the liquor store. Bev Green, she asked about her all the time, you know, because they were real close friends.
Okay.
And Grandma took her back to New York, and
Yeah, she left.
yeah. So, but it was, you know, she really wanted to stay. Her cousins were here. Dave Brenner and his brother were here.
Okay. They were cousins?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you know how the Brenners are related?
Somewhere, well, Tubby Isaacs, that was the nickname of their father. He was a fishmonger, and he had a fish house or a stand in Piccadilly Square in London. As a matter of fact, you go down to Arizona where the London Bridge is. They moved it from
In Arizona?
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
yeah, they moved the bridge over down to Lake Havas. I don't know what it
Okay.
is.
Yeah.
And they moved his store. They built a replica of his store,
No kidding.
and but it became a card shop, you know.
Okay.
But they contacted him, and he used to do jelly eels and all kinds of stuff like that. And they flew him down there, and they wanted him to prepare
Yeah.
what he did in England. He spent about a week down there,
Okay.
and he and his wife, and he was a great. Tubby was.
Tubby Isaacs,
Yeah,
yeah,
he was
yeah.
a big guy. I mean, big. He was short but round like a barrel, and spent a lot of time in Peoria. But they went back to England, you know.
But he's related somehow?
We related to Grandma.
Okay. Is it the same Isaacs family, maybe, that married into the Kaskowitzes? Do you know?
I have no idea.
Okay, yeah.
But their last name was Brenner.
Okay.
Yeah, Dave stayed in Peoria. His brother, I'm trying to think of his name, moved out to the New York area, and he became a butcher
Oh, okay.
out there. And he had I don't know how many kids they had, but and they were talented. Dave could play the violin, and I think his brother played the violin also. And on different occasions, Dave would get his violin out and play. And he ended up with marrying Harrison. What was her name? God, I'm horrible on names anymore.
It's okay. Yeah.
Davy Harrison's sister. And Dave Harrison, Mort Canner, and a couple other guys ran around together over the years. But they're all long gone now. You know, we had Dave Oxenfeld, who was from the Philadelphia area, and he ended up staying in Peoria. And he told us some stories from World War II. You know, we had him. Well, as a matter of fact, we had him over Mike for at one of the holidays. We had him over for dinner, and he was talking about he was a crew chief on a bomber, a B-17, and it was the general in charge. This was his plane, and Dave was crew chief on it. And as he was going through his training, everybody coming out of the training program got the rank of sergeant, but this colonel would not make duty a sergeant. He didn't like Jews.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So he never got the rank until later on. And they were someplace on the East Coast, and this colonel needed a ride to someplace, and came to the plane, you know, to see if he could get
it.
And Dave Doody looked at him and he said, "Sorry, no, we can't do it." And of course, he had the big crew chief. He had to say so.
Yeah.
And the general asked about it, and he told him. He said, "Most definitely, he's not riding in my plane."
Yeah.
So he got even with him. At that time, Dave was already master sergeant.
Oh, yeah. So he'd been promoted.
Yeah, he ran off with Mary Miller, got married the weekend of December 7th.
Really?
He got married just before that.
Wow.
And of course, when they came, they all kind of, Sam Bork used to come from Chanute Field. He'd bring several of the Jewish people up with him, his group. Okay. And Doody was one of them. That's what everybody called him, Doody. And it's on his gravestone, Dave Doody Oxenfeld.
What was that short for? Why did they call him that?
That was a nickname.
Just a nickname, yeah.
And I met his family out there. When I was out on the East Coast. They took me to the old synagogue in Philadelphia. I mean, it was old.
Yeah.
Beeman was directly in the middle of the room, you know.
Oh, one of those, yeah.
Women were up in the gallery.
Yeah, that's an old synagogue.
And they couldn't, well, we used to put them up at the house, Grandma's house, our house. Sam would come from 6 or 8 guys. Red Feldman, Doody, trying to remember, there was a couple of the others. One of them in the Philadelphia after the war formed C-Snack Corporation, and you used to get shrimp come in a glass, like a wine glass with a cap on top, and it was a shrimp cocktail.
Okay, yeah.
And that was his business.
Making the shrimp cocktails?
Yeah, well, but he formed the company C-Snack Corporation, and very successful. So I visited him at his house. God, I can't remember his name. But yeah, when Doody and Mary came in and announced that he'd run off and got married, and then turned the radio on. Everybody had to report back to their bases immediately, you know.
Yeah, how awful.
Yeah. So, they had quite a life in Peoria. They went to work for a company that made calendars. You'd go out and sell advertising, and you'd make your calendars and cards and whatever you needed for your business. And when he passed away, he was real close with the Ehrlichmans. They had a son, and he's buried out there. He died very young. And when he died, he had a Cadillac, and he gave it to Harry's brother. God, can't think. I got horrible with names lately.
Yeah.
But anyhow, left him most of everything. But they all were in World War II together, and
Yeah, all friends. Yeah.
yeah. So there aren't too many left around.
No, it's getting to be.
No, because I used to go out when I go to a funeral. It would be 3 or 4 of them, you'd talk with, and well, anyhow, we can continue later if you come up with something you want to know. I'll try.
No, I really appreciate the time, Grandpa.
Yeah.
This is great.
Yeah. So.
And we have the party today.
Yep, we got a birthday party.
That's gonna be good.
This is the last party, though.
What do you mean?
I'm not gonna celebrate any more birthdays. This is it.
Well, I hope that's not true.